Welcome, everybody, to episode 9 of Serve Like Jesus. I'm Ben Foley, the president of ServeNow, and I'm joined by Emily and Kendall, who you know at this point if you've watched any of these episodes. But you probably see two other faces on this particular podcast if you're watching this, and that would be Tony and Allison, who are board members of ServeNow. And so this is going to be a unique podcast. Up until this point, we have had on different guests, mostly some of our national leaders from around the world or team members from around the world. So this episode, we thought we would go a little closer to home and have Tony, who is the chairman of our board, and Allison, the vice chair of our board, sharing a little bit with us from their perspective as board members. Now, we usually do the first half of this segment with checking in with each other, seeing what God is speaking to us, and then also sharing a story from around the world from that particular week. But we're actually going to reverse the order of that for this particular episode. And so we're going to dive right in and engage with Tony and Allison first. And then the second half, Emily and Kendall and I will check in with each other. And if Tony and Allison can hang around, although some of us have some hard stops or other schedule pieces to get to, might hop off at that point. But anyway, it's going to be a little different of an episode for those reasons. But I'm very excited to have Tony and Allison joining us and sharing, again, from their perspective, uniquely as board members. And so let me just take a moment and let them mostly introduce themselves, and they can share a little bit of their background as far as work-wise, family-wise, whatever they would like to share. And why don't we start with you, Tony, as the chairman of the board?
Sure, that'd be great, Ben. And thank you for the opportunity to share with you folks. I've really enjoyed listening to the other podcasts, Lars and Edoxia and Arjun were all on, and I think those are the ones I caught. There may have been one or two others that I didn't catch. But really nice format, really great conversations, really cool to see what's going on around the world. You also had Tanya from Ukraine. I listened to that one as well. So it's an exciting ministry, and it's really a pleasure to be here with you. So by way of background, I'm a New Yorker. I was born in New York, found my way to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and will never go back to New York to live. I love to visit, but not be there any longer in a city than I have to. I'm married. My wife and I just celebrated our 44th anniversary, and that was last week. So we did have a nice dinner together last week. We have 10 grandchildren, and those 10 grandchildren live within an hour and 15 minutes of us, and that includes a brand new grandbaby who was born in the beginning of May. So that's really exciting for us. Professionally, I was an IT person, and I worked in IT for about 45 years or so. Started out as what we used to call programmers. We now use the term developer. We don't say programmer anymore. And worked my way up to lead a number of corporate IT organizations, both here in Lancaster and also for a company out in Toledo, Ohio. So we lived out there for a period. But Lancaster is home. After working in the corporate world, I was a consultant for about 5 years. About a year ago, I decided to retire. And since then, it's been just a pleasure spending more time with Edna, my wife, putzing around the house and doing some projects that I'm capable of doing and learning what I'm not capable of doing and having other people do the heavy lifting. And then we've done a little bit of travel, and we have more plans upcoming. So that's kind of the general background. And so let me then turn it over to Allison.
And actually, before we get to Allison, I just have to say, Tony, a couple things. Obviously, Tony is very Italian, and his favorite food is a good Hawaiian pizza with pineapple on it, especially extra pineapple, right, Tony?
Well, now, Ben, you're challenging your own integrity here by no self-serving Italian would eat pineapple. I stand by that, and we'll continue to live by that mantra there, Ben.
It is my favorite thing to do is try to provoke Tony with talking about pineapples on pizza. All right. Well, on that note, yeah.
Illegal, so.
On that note, yeah, Allison, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yes, good morning. It's great to be with you this morning, Ben. Doing things for and with ServeNow is one of my joys in life. I started out in California and I enjoyed a wonderful childhood there before moving to the Washington, D.C. area, where I worked for the government for 15, 16 years in various capacities, human rights commissions, State Department. I worked on Capitol Hill for a long time. I worked in a hybrid commission that promoted security and human rights around the world through the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which involves 56 countries in Europe and the US, and also some countries in the Far East. So I've gotten to see a lot of great things happen around the world, and I've really enjoyed that. I'm an attorney by training and now live outside of DC with my 2 children and my husband.
So obviously for those watching or listening, just hearing a little bit of that background from Tony and Allison, if you had any questions about the competency or the credibility of me or Kendall or Emily, which I'm sure there was no questions about Kendall or Emily, but me anyway. Now, hearing their background, obviously we have some pretty sharp, intelligent, accomplished people that are at least on our board. And so that should build some level of trust and credibility with having board members like Tony and Allison. And obviously there's a bunch more board members that are not on this call, but Tony being the chairman, Allison being the vice chair. And kind of on that note, I want to transition a bit to coming from backgrounds like that. How did you guys get connected to ServeNow? What's maybe even like your first memory of ServeNow, and what attracted you to ServeNow when you began to hear about it to the point that you're now board members? And of course, I have my own, version of each of your stories, but I would love to hear your account of that first, of how you got connected and what it was that attracted you to ServeNow.
So Ben, I'll go back a little bit to the fact that I was raised Catholic, but then accepted Christ as my Savior in about 1987. And so from that point, as Christ becomes a larger part of your life, and as the Word becomes a larger part of your life, you see what's going on around the world in areas, not just where you can help locally, but where you can now also help globally. And you said, Ben, and I've said this to other people too, but it's your words, what you can't do for everyone, you do for one. And so getting involved in ministry and understanding what we have here in the U.S. in terms of what we can offer the world is really amazing. So I'll just say that as a background. I knew Ben's parents before I knew Ben. We attended a church together and we're in the same small group. And I remember some really funny stories that Ben's dad would tell about Ben before I even met him. And so it was interesting because then once I met Ben is actually when he was president of ServeNow. And I say met, we probably crossed paths a few times. I knew Ben's brother better than I knew Ben. So when ServeNow, when Ben started as, I think, president in preparation, back when you first started, he and I had a conversation. My wife and I and Ben had a conversation, and I was really incredibly impressed by both the reach and the scope and the intensity of what ServeNow was doing. I had never met Lars at that point, but I saw what was happening, and we had a really good conversation about how ServeNow is reaching the lost and extending the kingdom. And it was through that we decided to start supporting ServeNow. At one point, Ben came to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in serving on the board?" And I prayed about it, and my wife affirmed it, and we said, yeah, this is a good thing to do and a right thing to do, and where we feel led, we should be contributing. And so we attended a first board meeting, kind of a test, if you will, and I'll affirm what Ben just said too about the quality of the people on the board. From a Christian intensity perspective, desire to really advance this ministry and be passionate about what ServeNow is doing. And it's been a great opportunity, really a great searching for the word. It's been a great time serving this board, last few years as chairperson, and just really appreciate the contributions of all the board members and, the way that they've knit in and assimilated and leveraged the passion they have for ServeNow into really solid board service. And so I'm really appreciative of how the Lord has worked that among the board, and it's just been a great experience.
Which I'll say two things there, and I know we'll get to a little bit of this later, but I was thinking about this in preparation for this podcast, having Tony and Allison you on as board members. Like they don't get anything out of this, like in terms of they're not paid to be on our board like Kendall, Emily, and I are paid to be employees of ServeNow, right? There's no monetary benefit to them, which in and of itself is a whole other question, and we will get to some of this later, of like, why in the world would anybody serve on a board freely when you have nothing really in that sense to gain from it? But I did want to highlight that just to note, like, this is done of their own free will. It's a sacrifice, it's a service that they offer with, again, no real benefit, at least in that sense, to them. And I know they would probably talk about the richness of the relationships and interactions and all that of meeting different people, whether board members, staff, leaders around the world, all of that. But I think that is just important to highlight. The second thing was you referenced a quote, and it's probably not technically really my quote. I think I stole it from Kendall, but Kendall stole it from another leader too. But the idea of do for the one what you wish you could do for the many, I think is actually the way that I've heard Kendall put it. And again, he's quoting it from another leader. But and actually Lars, our founder, who knew Mother Teresa personally, kind of expressed the same kind of sentiment, because the need of the world can be overwhelming, and it's just about focusing on the one that is in front of you, and instead of being crippled and paralyzed by the vast need that is out there, it can put you in a position of not doing anything at all, just paralyzing, crippling, and going, what difference can I make? But it does make a difference to that one, or however many, that you can actually serve or do something for. So I think that is a really important quote, something I think that I hope drives us every day is do for the one what you wish you could do for the many. And Kendall, did I get that right? That's I think that is the quote from another leader.
Yeah, that's correct. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone.
Okay, there it is. Good. All right, great. Thank you, Tony. And yeah, I'm sure we could have my dad on this podcast, and there could be all kinds of stories, and there would be a question of how in the world did that boy end up in this position with some of the antics. I remember two vivid things I'll just share real briefly. Like, there was twice when I was learning to drive that I ran out of gas, and I had to call my dad and him come out and fill the car with gas in the middle of the road. And I remember how upset he was about that irresponsibility and recklessness. But the reason I share that story is because a little bit of that spirit still kind of lives in me, even with the nature of ServeNow's work. Like, I kind of like and thrive living right on the edge. And I often say, like, leading people on trips, or if we're going up, some pretty dangerous mountain terrain. Kendall's been with me in this context. Tony's been with me in this context. Going up these mountains, and there's just a sheer drop off the side. Like, you're never more alive than when you think you're going to die. And this idea of the sovereignty of God suddenly becomes something more than a debate or a theological discussion when, you kind of got to actually trust him with your life, right? Going right into a war zone in Ukraine or into terrorist-controlled territory in different countries, and some of those that I won't even name. We do some, dangerous stuff right up to that line, and I think there was probably evidence of some of that at an early age in some stories of frustration that my dad would probably share or has shared with you, Tony. That would be some of the ones that would initially come to mind, besides some other, worse ones than that. But anyway, yeah, that might be a topic for another time. Anyway, all that to say, thank you for sharing a little bit of your background. Allison, what would you like to share as far as your connection to ServeNow and what it was that drew you?
Well, my first connection with ServeNow was in a professional context. Ben was in a suit and acting like a very contained human being on Capitol Hill, meeting with different offices and getting the word out about ServeNow. ServeNow was a newer organization. They didn't have the visibility of many of the other nonprofits. And my job part of my job at that time was to listen to the groups that were on the front lines of delivering services and developing programs in different parts of the world, and to gather what was really working and to hear from them what was problematic and what needed to be changed in the legal framework or the policy framework. And so I met with Ben to find out more about what ServeNow was doing around the world. My specialty in particular was human trafficking prevention and mitigation. And so Ben shared with me about ServeNow's program where women are vulnerable women, women who've been previously trafficked or who are in danger of being trafficked, are taught tailoring skills. And what I really appreciated about the program was that it brought women from villages as well as, the central part of the city, and taught them, gave them a sewing machine, trained them on how to spot opportunities that are actually trafficking opportunities to be trafficked, and then sent them back home with the sewing machine and with the knowledge to help their villages avoid trafficking situations. So it was training the trainers, really, as well as giving these women a livelihood to support themselves and their families. So I was very impressed with the thoroughness and thoughtfulness of that program. And I didn't know at that time that ServeNow did 50 other things. That broke the mold for me. These organizations, most nonprofits that I work with have one or two specific things that they do really well, and you call on them for those things. ServeNow does so many things in so many different countries, and it was very overwhelming to learn all that at first. And I thought, this organization's having an identity crisis. They need to pick their thing and do their thing. But as I got to know ServeNow more, I realized because of the way that the organization is managed, decentralized with country leaders, handling the projects in those countries, that ServeNow can actually handle this and do it really, really well. And the thing, if I had to say what ServeNow specializes in, it's asking pastors and local ministries, what do you need to share God's love with your community? And then trying their best to fill that need in a way that's really practical for that particular community. And then the other thing that the chain that runs through the other programs, which I love, is discipleship. We see a lot of organizations doing evangelization, a lot of organizations doing humanitarian aid. ServeNow specializes in discipleship. We have the Basic Things series books, which I'm sure Ben's talked about in previous podcasts. These are books about booklets about the basics of Christianity. We have them in over 36 languages. They are value added to any ministry. We work with many other ministries just to provide these books and to support the ministries that are already ongoing through other organizations. And so I loved the discipleship component of the humanitarian aid and the working with the local leaders. And so I loved my job. I loved working for the government. It was very interesting and exciting work, but it would have been wildly inappropriate for me to be discipling or explaining in great detail that Christ's love compels me to humanitarian work. I couldn't do that in my job, but I can do that through ServeNow, and that is a joy.
Wow, that really, really well said. And I remember one banquet you shared at, Allison, saying that using that language, it seems like ServeNow in its scope and its reach and just all the different things we're doing in different countries can feel really overwhelming. And it cracks me up when you say it was almost like we have an identity crisis, but then, really realizing that, and the way I like to put it, I'm sure I've repeated this several times now in several episodes, but Jesus came for one main purpose, but he didn't do just one thing. He served people according to the need, and it was contextualized, it was localized, it was even personalized to, where he was and who he was with, and in a way that demonstrated God's love and led to lives being transformed. So I just love that. I do want to share two things, though, from my perspective that both of you touched on as far as your connection to ServeNow, and Kendall and Emily can jump in as well at this point before we get to the next question. But I remember, Tony, I think the first time we officially talked, at least within the ServeNow context, I just wanted to mention it was actually at a home meeting at Emily's parents' house. Do I have that right? Do you think that was...
Yes. No, that's exactly right. I remember, I believe Tanya was there and Super Tim.
Yeah, we had two of our leaders there, and you and Edna came to that because you were friends with Emily's parents, right, and my parents. Right. At that time, that was kind of a little group there. So just interesting that connection there with Emily. And then Allison, it was interesting. I was on Capitol Hill meeting with various people and in different offices, and one of the people I was going to meet with was running a little late, and so they had one of their staff members, who happened to be Allison, I think, trying to, keep me company or maybe keep me contained. I don't know, waiting for him. And so we had, I think, like 30 minutes together, and we started talking. And you mentioned that your husband grew up as a missionary child in Uganda. And I was like, oh, that was the first country that ServeNow started in, and we snowball rolled from there. So had that ended up having that brief interaction with you while waiting to meet with a congressperson that you were, working for at the time, and then went on and had all these other meetings. But on the way home from DC during that drive, and I will say after also getting in an accident, wasn't my fault. That one wasn't my fault, by the way, but the rental car I was in, some van kind of scraped by and I was able to drive it the rest of the way home, but then had to switch it out. Anyway, after that accident, I got home, and even on the way home, I remember this weird thought coming to mind, just kind of out of the blue, of thinking, that woman I met with while I was waiting to meet with somebody else, she would probably make a really good board member. And I think it was even that night when I got back that I reached out and said, hey, this might sound, a bit out of the blue or crazy, but would you be interested in exploring this possibility? And here we are years later, and sure enough, you did join the board and now vice chair of the board. So it's just interesting how, these connections happen, and maybe even the reason that I thought I was there on Capitol Hill at that particular time talking about a couple particular topics, one in particular, it ended up having another purpose that I wasn't even thinking was the reason that I was there. So it's just kind of cool how those things work out or work together. Kendall, Emily, anything you want to add or anything you're hearing as Tony and Allison have talked so far?
Well, I think, Allison, were you going to add something to what Ben said about that first meeting or interaction?
I was just going to add that it was a day that most days on Capitol Hill have a lot of unexpected things in them, but that was incredibly unexpected. Yes. And I'm very thankful for that meeting.
Awesome.
I'll just say that I knew Tony before I worked with ServeNow, and it was just really special to be able to know that we were able to work together on the same mission. And he's hosted some home meetings at his house, connecting with some other folks in the community, and introduced us to people at his church. And it's been nice to begin getting to know Allison. I look forward to getting to know Allison even better. We have board members that are often around the country, and us on staff don't always get to interact as much with the board. So this is real special, Allison, having you on this podcast.
Yeah, and I'll just note too, Kendall just referenced about home meetings, and again, just how vital things like that are. And that is a tangible way that if you're interested in helping ServeNow in some way, that's a huge thing for us, is to just get us in front of or expose ServeNow to people within your network. And that can happen through even sharing, these podcasts. That can happen through opening up your home. That can happen many different ways. But it is remarkable the connections that have come out of that. Even a lot of our major supporters have come through being at a home meeting that was in somebody else's home that they, opened up their home to have people in, and they heard about ServeNow. So just something to keep in mind for those that are watching or listening.
And I know you do this, Ben. I know when you have country leaders in the U.S., you bring them to home meetings, and they are incredibly effective in relaying the work of the ministry and what they're accomplishing for the kingdom. And it's just really exciting to see them. So that's a great way to do it as well. And it's an attraction, really. It's to say, here's a missionary in the field. Let's hear their story. And most believers are interested in that. Let me hear what's going on around the world, and specifically with a country leader. And I would also add that the country leaders are just phenomenal individuals. Every one of them that I've met, and I haven't met all of them, but I've met most of them, are just really on fire for the Lord people and high energy, and there's just no stopping them in terms of how they want to reach their communities. And no hurdle is too big. No bomb shelter is too expensive. No bakery is too expensive. A million bicycles. There's a vision there for reaching others that is just really impressive, and it's really touching, and it really does touch your heart in a special way.
It's awesome. Thank you, Tony. Well, tell us a little bit, both of you, what is life like for you on this side of ServeNow, being a board member? What what does that comprised of, and what is your perspective on ServeNow, not just in the present but even looking towards the future? Like, what are you excited about, and what do you get to be a part of and involved in as a board member?
Listen, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, I'd be happy to start on that. As Tony was just saying, the people that you get to work with is incredible. It's just an incredibly encouraging experience to work with the other board members, to work with the country leaders. Eudoxia has been on here. Arjun's been on this podcast. We get to hear from them at board meetings very frequently. And that is always the highlight of the board meeting, to hear from the people that are on the front lines, serving, delivering the aid that's needed, delivering the love that's needed, delivering the hope that is needed, to hear the stories from around the world that are sometimes available over email and snow time. We get to hear them right up front. I love the story about the Yazidi camps, and that how the Yazidis felt forgotten by the world. The last genocide was in 2015, but they're still in camps and they're still in need. And ServeNow is showing up. We're the only ones in some cases showing up to help them in their continuing need. The Joseph Project in Sri Lanka, just providing garden vegetables for people who are suffering from hunger and the economic collapse in Sri Lanka. So just hearing these stories, hear about the ingenuity, hearing about the ideas that come in from around the world. And it's, as board members, we want to say yes to everything, and we don't necessarily, we're not the final arbiters of which programs we do, but we do have kind of a bird's eye view over everything that's happening, and have a sense of the budget and where can we go, and how big can we go, and how far can we push our limits, and what money can we leverage. So it's a big picture experience of trying to get a sense of where the money would be best spent, where the need is the greatest, when it is wise to expand, when it's wise to try and maintain. And so there's a lot of discernment and prayer that has to go into being a board member to do the job well. But the growth of ServeNow is exciting. I got to know ServeNow 7-8 years ago, and I think we've almost tripled in size since then. Like, it has been growing gangbusters. People really, I think, connect with the idea of you can be that SWAT team on the ground meeting the needs. We are very flexible. We are very agile. We can get in there and get the job done. And we've got the people on the ground, the trusted partners on the ground to do it. So there's a sense of empowerment. We were talking earlier about how the needs of the world can be overwhelming. Being a board member makes those needs much less overwhelming, because you can address the needs. It is worth it. And there is that opportunity on a daily basis. And sometimes we run into challenges with political situations in countries and difficulties, and sometimes we stay, sometimes we pivot. They're God-sized challenges, but we serve a big God, and He has shown that again and again and again. And it's a joy to be there on the front line, and for me, more of a board member, being in a front row seat of seeing God come through and seeing lives changed and hope established and joy spread.
Yeah, that was really well said, Allison. Thank you for that. I'll add a couple of things. We do have a governance responsibility, in terms of overseeing strategy, overseeing finances, managing risk, ensuring that the right practices are in place to sustain the organization. And I think that's been a big thing for us over the last year or so. What are the things that we can do to ensure that we're sustaining this great work that's happening and allowing it to expand? And so, the Lord has really blessed ServeNow. For us to see that is just really encouraging. And I think as board members, we try to be really encouraging, not just to each other as board members, but also to the staff, to Ben and to the staff. And Ben, as the leader of the organization, is managing a team, and it has its challenges and it has its upsides. And, we work together to ensure that Ben has a sounding board. He can come to the board and say, "Hey, I'm dealing with this. What do you guys think?" And we're there for that. And I think that's just a blessing to be part of that kind of engagement with Ben and really with the whole team. And so I would say encouraging is a large part of what we do as a board. To affirm where the needs are being presented, and to take Ben and his team's recommendations on, look, this is where we're going to concentrate in this country. This is where we're going to concentrate, in terms of this service. And, to see that, understand it, and encourage the team is is a blessing.
Yeah, you guys are getting me fired up on a couple things. Allison mentioned ServeNow, describing it as like a SWAT team going in and just getting the job done. And oh man, that gets me excited. Or I think of like, Navy SEALs going into some, difficult place to accomplish some specific mission. And we talk about, actually, as part of our core values, that idea of being flexible and agile. And the way we've worded it, or our founder has worded it early on, was like we take kind of a guerrilla warfare approach, not in terms, obviously, of physical, not the literal meaning of that, but the idea of, we're just in some ways like this ragtag group. And by ragtag, I don't mean like incompetent. I mean, obviously, I like the Navy SEAL SWAT team analogy because that might give a little bit more sense of training and purpose and, knowing what needs to be done and how to get it done kind of thing, and having the people to get it done. But, just that ability to quickly respond to needs where they are and as they arise, and in a very intentional, thoughtful kind of way. And that is a big part of the board's role, is to evaluate all those things. And so these are not just haphazard things that we randomly do. There is a long, extensive, list of projects with great detail and the reasoning behind why and all of that. And as part of that, even as board members, every board member is expected to be also on a board committee. And so I'm wondering, Tony and Allison, if you can talk about that a little bit, the different committees that we have that you are serving on or have served on, and kind of their unique purpose within the context of the board in evaluating different aspects of ServeNow and how it operates and how we make decisions. Sorry, Tony, I think you're on mute if you were talking.
That's never happened before. We have a finance committee, we have a governance committee, we have a program and development committee, and I'm forgetting, there's one that I'm forgetting and it's just not top of mind at the moment. But finance is certainly what you'd expect. We review monthly reports, we look at the sources of revenue, the expenses, what we have in the bank in terms of what are, looking forward, financial stability, insurance, and like all that kind of stuff, shared. Some of that is shared with other committees as well. Governance is about structure, and do we have the right policies in place? Not just for the board, but also for the organization. And so there's a policy component of that. And then governance also does some work in terms of recruiting new board members, identifying, recruiting new board members. So that board, the board managing itself, is also part of what we do in governance. Program committee would be evaluating the program opportunities as Ben's team presents them to us. And so, there's a pretty extensive amount of work that goes into identifying those opportunities and then prioritizing them, because of course you can't do everything. And so that work is part of what we look at program committee. And then the development strategies and the fundraising strategies are part of the program and development committee as well. So all of those kind of fit together in terms of supporting the work of the board and the work of ServeNow, in terms of making sure we're focused on the mission and what do we have to do to make sure the mission is successful, and how do we ensure that we have the resources across the board so that the team can be successful, not just here in the U.S. but internationally.
Yeah, and the other committee is the executive committee.
Oh yeah, by the way, the executive committee is really the officers of the board. So chair, vice chair, chairman of the finance committee, chairman of governance, chairman of program and development. And so it's kind of another level of really governance, if you will, to say, all right, what are the right things that we should be addressing as a board? What are some of the things we need to discuss with Ben in terms of staffing and resourcing from his perspective, and basically setting the agenda for the board meetings. And we give ourselves quite a bit of homework in that as well. So it really is a great team effort across all the board members and the committees that contribute to the board conversations. So again, that's just as part of what you do, and when you see the fruit of the ministry, all that behind the scenes work becomes really worth it.
Yeah, and Tony, by nature, being board chair, and even myself as president, as a I always say this wrong, ex officio, whatever.
Yes.
I participate in all those committee meetings, as does Tony as chairman of the board. But Allison, what committees have you served on, are you serving on currently? And I think also is just part of the reason we wanted to touch on these things is just to give you a little glimpse behind the scenes of, the level of work and the level of time and that goes into all of this. And, I think you can speak to this as well, Allison, like what is the difference between the board's role versus my role with staff and employees, and how do those work together?
Well, I'd answer the specific question. Our role as the board is not to get involved in the day-to-day decision making that belongs to the president of the organization, right? We personnel matter. Our job is not to be in the nitty-gritty. Our job is to be big picture. Where is ServeNow going? Do we have the finances to get there? Do we have the policies in place to make sure that we're mitigating risk in our programs overseas and to make sure that we're setting up ServeNow for success? Are we using the skills and gifts of the actual board members effectively within the board? So I say that specifically because I was the chairman of the governance committee for several years. I just handed that off. But we were looking at how are we doing? Are we keeping up with industry standards? We spent a lot of time looking at the ECFA guidelines for everything. We use ECFA guidelines for everything, and making sure that the way that we use the money, the way that the board is organized, everything is at the highest standard, so that we can function very well and avoid any problems that would otherwise arise. And so a lot of the board's work is doing the big picture things that Ben may not have time for, but Ben gets everything done, really. Ben is involved in everything all of the time as our president. And so now I'm moving over to the program committee, but as the vice chair, I'm actually on every committee, including the executive committee. And then I was going to say on the executive committee, we get some of the big decisions that don't necessarily fit neatly into the other committees, and we have to work through strategy on something. But one of the things we worked a lot on in recent years is how to effectively use willed gifts in line with the donor's wishes. We received a very large and generous gift from a woman who was a supporter of ServeNow. She died unexpectedly, which was kind of a shock. But then we had her beautiful gift to the ministry, and we spent quite a bit of time figuring out, would she have wanted the money to go to this program or that program or this part of the world or that part of the world. And we were able, I think, to honor her well and use her gift well in a way that she would be very pleased.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys for all you do. Do you have any kind of final words for those listening or hearing this, or even like what are you most excited about or want people to know about when it comes to ServeNow?
I think Allison mentioned this earlier, but I think of Henry Blackaby's book, Experiencing God, and one of the tenets of that book is, look, go find out where God is working and go jump on board. And I think that could be a motto of ServeNow, because we do with our leaders, and even outside of the leaders, and selecting new leaders and going to do work in different parts of the world, where is the Lord working? And where do we see him working? And then how do we jump on that? And there's no lack of that at all. And, we can be discouraged by what's happening in the world, but I prefer to be encouraged by all the different ways that we see the Lord working, not just in the U.S., but globally. And so let's be part of that. Let's be, an enabler of what people are doing within their communities and within their countries or areas. And let them be the hands and feet of Jesus while we help them with that. And so that's what excites me, because I don't see this ending. I see this continuing to grow. More countries, more leaders, more languages, more people developing and deepening their faith. It's just it's a beautiful thing to see, and to be part of that is just incredible.
Yeah, that book by Henry Blackaby, by the way, Experiencing God, that definitely shaped my life at a very early age, even before ServeNow, and even just that title, Experiencing God, to me, that is what not only the Christian life is about, but even ServeNow. It's helping others experience God in life-transforming ways. But as you're the one, even in that position of serving others so that they can experience God, you're also experiencing God in a unique way there too. Like Jesus said, where I am, there my servant will be too. And there's things within that context of serving him that we experience of God that we otherwise would not if we were not in the place of directly partnering with him where he's working and where he's at. So yeah, that book has had a profound impact on my life and way of operating and thinking too.
I just want to comment. Thanks, Allison, for mentioning the work that the board has been doing on the ECFA guidelines, because I think, working with donors, that's something that's really important to people, to make sure that an organization is working with the highest integrity. So thank you guys for all the work that you've done on that.
And by the way, ECFA stands for the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. And they're actually not the only ones where we have a level of accountability with or adhering to their standards or guidelines. There's also Excellence in Giving is another accredited group that we work with. And then you can find us on a number of different platforms, from Ministry Watch to GuideStar, I hope I'm saying that one right, which I think they just merged with Candid or something like that. But, we're out there in a number of different, independent parties that provide some level of oversight. And in addition to all that, of course, are audited every year by an independent auditor. So, there's a lot of oversight that happens on a number of levels, from within, from the board, and even from without of other entities.
Tony, I'm glad you brought up Experiencing God, and Ben as well. Like that book is legendary, informative, I think, for many of us. In answer to your question, Ben, a few weeks ago, we celebrated Pentecost Sunday, for those of us who follow the Anglican calendar for the church, which was the coming of the Holy Spirit to the disciples in Acts 1, sent them out to the world to share the good news of God's love with everybody that was assembled, the whole world that was assembled there, every language. And this week, I was reminded by Lectio 365 that there was a subsequent outpouring of the Holy Spirit in Acts 4, and that doesn't get talked about quite as much. The disciples had been sharing Christ with everyone in Jerusalem, and they were taking some serious heat from the religious leaders. They were scared. They weren't sure what was going to happen next, and they prayed in Acts 4, and they didn't say, God, we need comfort. God, we need protection. God, save us. They said, God, we need courage, and we need more ways to reach out to the people. And God delivered. God poured out his Spirit on them again and gave them more ways to reach the people. And so I was very challenged by that example this week, and I think it really encapsulates what we're talking about today. Like, God calls us to courageous engagement and outside our comfort zones, and to get out there, to not be safe in our little cocoons, to not be safe at home, to not be safe in any way necessarily. God doesn't call us to safety. God calls us to engagement. And so that's where you experience God. And I would just leave you all with that.
I love that. By the way, do you guys know, a lot of people don't know this, that there is a lesser known, but I think maybe as powerful or at least an important book that Henry Blackaby, and I think one of his sons, or they wrote it together or something, wrote after experiencing God, titled Experiencing God Together. And I like that dynamic, because it's one thing to experience God ourselves personally and individually, which is obviously critically important, but there's more to it than just our own personal, walk with him. We're meant to experience God together and to be doing this together. And it really does take a team of people in different roles, different positions, different perspectives, different cultures, different languages, there is an experience of God together that is unique in that context than even how we experience God, uniquely, personally, and individually. Mm-hmm. All right, awesome. Well, Tony, Allison, you're welcome to stay on, or if you need to get running, we're gonna do again what we normally do at the beginning, but we're doing it on the flip side here of just checking in with each other, seeing what God is speaking to us, talking about encountering or experiencing God. And then also how we're seeing him, experiencing him at work around the world through some recent story within the ServeNow context. So again, you're welcome to hang out with us, but I think at least one of you needed to jump off or run somewhere else. So
that
feel
was me.
free.
I gotta get my kids out the door, but it's a joy to be with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was nice to meet you, Allison.
Nice to
Thank
meet
you,
you
Allison.
as well. I look forward to listening in. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Ben, I think I'll jump off too.
okay.
and I'll catch your conversation when the podcast is released. And I just thank you for the time. I really appreciate it. And I hope that, scads of new people decide to support ServeNow as a result of the conversations that you're leading here. So thank
Amen.
you for doing this. Appreciate it very much. And Kendall, Emily, thank you for your time. I appreciate it as well. And so you guys all have a great day, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Good to see you.
Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Tony. All right. And then there was 3.
And my hard stop is 10:45.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Well, and I've got a little bit of a dilemma. My earbuds are just about out of power. This is the first time we've ever gone this long. And so anyway, yeah, if I lose my earbuds, I'll just talk and mute as needed. So we'll see how that goes.
All right. Well, let's check in with each other. What's God been saying to you guys recently?
I think for me, I was going from a season of just being intentional in the presence of God and walking through, like, it's not about how much you do, but it's what you do. And so now I feel like I'm learning more about valuing his presence rather than always relying on his direction. Because sometimes, we all know God doesn't always give us clear answers for prayer. Maybe he's preparing us for the next step in the answer and teaching us something in the waiting. And it's looking at it different, whereas maybe it's just a season of deeply getting to know him more rather than just chasing after God. What is the answer to this? Why are you having me experience this? And I think it's hard for us sometimes to imagine that, just because we live in a culture that's so trained for that instant gratification. Like, we want the answer now. We want the answer now. We don't want to wait. And so I think just being able to know God deeper into those moments when I'm not getting answers, something I'm kind of walking through now.
Yeah, well, and for me, I think I've been on a bit of a roller coaster the last couple of weeks, just with some challenges happening in life. And I think what God's been doing in my life is patiently teaching me what it looks like to work together with him. The verse that came to my mind is kind of our theme verse for this year that Ben had introduced to our team from Isaiah 40 about soaring on wings like eagles, but the only way to soar on wings like eagles is waiting on the Lord. And the idea of renewing strength is really about exchanging our strength for God's strength. And it's truly that idea of partnering together, that God is able to bring in the strength that we need when we don't have the strength we need. And yet the purpose of him bringing in that strength is so that we can continue to do the work that he's called us to do. And so what God has been doing in my life is just continuing to patiently teach me how to work together with him, because I have a tendency to go back and forth between either trying to do it all on my own or just saying, oh God, will you just get it done? I can't seem to accomplish what I need to do or what I want to do or whatever, can you just fix all my problems? And God doesn't just automatically take over, and he doesn't abandon me. It's just learning how to continue to wait, actively wait, and trust in him to renew me when I am needing that renewal.
Well, those are both very relatable things that you both shared. For me, I guess I've been getting most excited about, I've been going through the book of Numbers devotionally, and I've actually been sharing a lot of those with staff, probably more than they wish I would. But in Numbers 31, verse 2, the one I'm going to share with actually staff this very day, probably after this call, is where the Lord says to Moses something that's just gotten me kind of fired up. And it's in some ways strange language at first, but I'll provide a little context for it and how I think it's applicable for us today, where he says, take vengeance on the Midianites for the Israelites, on behalf of the Israelites. And then after that, you'll be gathered to your people. So this is going to be kind of like the final act of Moses. But take vengeance. This is God saying to Moses, take vengeance on the Midianites on behalf of the Israelites. And so this idea of taking vengeance on the enemy for the harm and seduction that they had been causing to a lot of the Israelites. And there's a lot of story and context behind all of that I won't go into here. But it just made me think of that verse in 1 John 3. Like today, like our battle is not against flesh and blood. Ephesians talks about that. Our battle is not against human beings, and we are not to take vengeance into our own hands in the sense of retaliation or revenge against one another. That's not our place. However, there is something, and there is a place for, I guess, what I would call holy vengeance, or doing holy damage, holy destruction to the enemy. And by enemy, I don't mean people, but I mean the devil and his minions, the forces of darkness itself. And here's how I think this is applicable, because 1 John 3, verse 8 talks about the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the evil one. And that, there again, that language, like, I think when we think of the reason why Jesus came was to save us, right? To provide forgiveness for our sin, to give us the gift of eternal life. That's usually the language we use when we share about the reason that he came. But John says the reason he came, he kind of words this slightly differently, or not slightly, kind of drastically, is to destroy the devil's work, like the stronghold that he has on our lives, the charges that he has against us, the damage that he does, the bondage that he causes through our sin. I mean, Jesus came to blow all that up. He came to destroy it. There is a holy destruction that Jesus, that's why he came. He entered into enemy territory. He entered into the enemy camp to blow it up, to rescue, to redeem, to free the captives, which would be us. And so, like, there is a place for all of this in the Christian life. And I don't know, just this idea of take vengeance on the enemy in a sense of make him pay for what he's done. And I don't mean this in a human sense. I just mean, like, the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and he does cause a lot of damage and a lot of destruction. But can we take those things, even that he's robbed, or that he's stolen, or that he's damaged, or that he's destroyed, or even just, his work around the world on behalf of other people? Can we do some holy damage? Can we do some holy destruction? Can we take even the things that he's robbed from us and make him pay for it? Even if we can't get those things back, like, is there good that can come out of it that will bring a level of punishment, vengeance, holy, to on behalf of other people that might help others? So I'm just thinking about that, and some losses I've gone through and grief, and we've all shared on that. It's like, okay, he might have caused damage here, but how can I use that to actually damage the forces of darkness? And I don't know, that gets me excited to think about. I know I can't take vengeance on people, but we certainly can go do some damage in the enemy's camp.
Yeah, and I think it's also a testimony of how we respond to that, and using our testimony to encourage others to come to faith. So that does a lot of damage to the enemy and what his intentions are. And so he never wants us to have a testimony.
Exactly. That's exactly what I think about when people, sharing their testimony or whatever it might have been that they got delivered from or saved out of or whatever. Like, that's a way to do damage, because it's it's on behalf of other people that we do that. And I think that's the right way to think about that. And some days you want to exert some vengeance, so to know that there is a holy way to go about that kind of does help. That we're not as helpless as we might sometimes feel, is that God can use us, and he can use what we have been through for the benefit of and the good of others. Mm-hmm. Good. Well, any story around the world, ServeNow wise, that caught your attention this week?
My story was from a country in Asia, South Asia, that it's getting hot here where we live in Pennsylvania. And so the story that just stood out to me was about the summer camps that are happening in this country, and 130 children had come, and a lot of them came from another faith, but a lot of them were invited by friends. And I think just hearing how, even though it was hot, they prayed against all of these things, that the camps would continue. And so I think it was just cool to hear the stories of transformation in kids, young kids, learning how to pray for the first time, and hearing Bible stories and singing worship songs. And I think that was just something that stuck out, especially because some of the programs that happened in these areas didn't even have like a physical church building, but they still had a way to make it happen. And so I had been on a mission trip before where we did summer camps for kids, and it was in the middle of a soccer field. So when there's a will, there's a way. And I think just God paving the way for this to happen, even in extreme heat and conditions that we wouldn't find favorable, is just something really cool.
Yeah, that's great. Those are such great stories. I love reading those about the kids at their VBS. The one that stood out to me it was in West Africa. There's a country that we work in that last year had a leader that was actually assassinated for his Christian faith, working in very, very difficult circumstances. And the prayer that I was praying was, God, just raise up 10 more of leaders that can really continue to share the work of the gospel of Christ even in these difficult circumstances. And I was just so encouraged to see that our leader there in that country felt a calling to put together a committee of people, because he commented that he actually quoted from Billy Graham, who said, let us serve the Lord with all of our hearts, with a sense of holy urgency, as though his return could be at any moment. Yet let us also labor faithfully, plan wisely, and build for the future, as though he may tarry for many years. In this way, we remain watchful for his coming, while steadfastly doing the work that he entrusted us. And he said that with the murder of this pastor who had been doing a lot of work, he just felt a calling to prepare for the future by putting together a committee of leaders that could carry on work if any one of them, something happened to any one of them. And I just thought of that as such a beautiful strategic move. It reminded me of my book that we talked about on one of the podcasts. It reminded me of this conversation we had today with some of our board members and the committees that we have with ServeNow. And just really that calling is to continue to just plan and be strategic in working for the future. So I just thought that was really cool. So there were 8 people on that committee, and they represent different ministries in that community. And I thought that was a really cool story to read as a follow-up to a very sad circumstance that country faced with the loss of this leader.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful example too of I've often joked, and this can be true in the unhealthy version of this, in terms of, for God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee, right? That's kind of the joke out there. And I think the unhealthy version of committees are when it slows down the work or is outsourcing the work that everybody should be engaged in, and kind of justifies or excuses our lack of involvement or engagement or awareness or whatever. So that's the unhealthy side. This was a very healthy version of what it really can look like, of others being empowered and raised up and set loose to effectively carry on and carry out the work of what God's calling us to. And same with our board. I genuinely mean this. I'm not just saying this because it's being recorded, but I mean, we have the best board we've ever had. It is functional, it is healthy, it is filled with competent people that genuinely care and are passionate about ServeNow and are using their gifts in that capacity to help us effectively carry out what we believe God has called us to. So anyway, just to echo that there is a positive side of this. And back to some things we've talked about even during this whole call, we're not meant to do this life alone. That's true personally. It's true in service to God. It's just true in general that we are meant to do this together. At its very core, even though I joke, God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee, he sent his only son, but it was really, and the Trinity is, from the very beginning, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and there's a fellowship, there's a cooperation, there's a working, there's a partnership together that gets carried out, and we've been created in his image, meaning we're created for relationship, not just with him, but with each other. And so that's a great example of that. All right. Well, for me, I'll just be quick. But in West Africa, I wish we could have some more of our leaders on that are involved in projects like this than what we can. But for safety, security reasons, there's multiple leaders we can't actually have on, or it would be a risk to them personally. But we are trying to do, I've said this, I think, before, a lot more micro enterprise type projects. They help to empower entire communities. They help to offset cost even for us in areas that we would otherwise get involved with, but now they can take ownership and responsibility for, and it's very empowering, these type of projects. But there was a woman that we gave goats to, and her comment was, "Thank you, God, my goat has had a baby goat already." But then this line, "She is more than a project to me," just really caught my attention. And she said, "She made me busy looking for her food and cleaning her shade." And by busy there, what I take from that is this has given her purpose, this has given her meaning, this has given her a sense of empowerment in regard to her life and her future. And she said now they are two, so she's experiencing the fruit, the multiplication of this. I'm so grateful to those who made this possible. But this is more than a project to me, I think says it all. And we really genuinely hope that everything we're involved in, we might call them projects or programs or whatever, but we genuinely are not looking to just do projects or programs. Like, it's all about people, and we want these things to be more than projects. We want them to be encounters with the living God that transform, improve people's lives, empower, and equip them also to thrive and to do what God has called them to do.
I love that. And when you said that comment, it made me think that would be a really cool marketing campaign.
There you go, Emily. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all again for watching, for listening, tuning in to this episode and ones before. Please subscribe, like, comment, send us questions or topics that you'd like us to maybe even consider talking to or bringing people in on. But we would love to hear from you, and also share this with others and help us to spread not just awareness about ServeNow, but what God is doing around the world, because we are called to partner and to do this together. But until next time, God bless you.